Okay, this morning, we're beginning in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where Brother Philip just read. And I'll give you a quick review from last week. We began in Isaiah chapter 59. And I submitted to you last week at the end of 59, you saw a redemptive covenant that was on the verge of being revealed to the world. And when you get into chapter 60, this image, a metaphor of a sunrise is happening. The sunrise is shining on the earth. The actual sunrise, where God said, "Let there be light," at the beginning of the world, was just a prefigurement of the real sunrise that is to come. The image that Isaiah is giving to us is there is a sun that is about to shine, and it's going to dwarf the actual sun. And the former glory of the moon, the glory that you guys have been seeing in the old covenant, is going to be dwarfed. It's going to be diminished by this latter glory that I'll reveal. And this is going to be the rising of the sun that's going to happen in history. In the history of the cosmos, the real sun is about to be revealed to the earth. And so Paul is expounding on this, and Paul, the apostle, is in 2 Corinthians chapter 7. He's describing this shift from the old covenant to the new covenant, and he's describing what this ministry looks like, and I'm not going to go into all the details again, but when we get into chapter 4, he gives just a little bit more detail of what he meant when he said, where the Spirit of the Lord there is liberty. Wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Now, we've heard that verse quoted a lot, haven't we? We hear that, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty. Everybody wants liberty, right? Or freedom. Freedom. What would be the best kind of government? Well, it's when everybody has freedom. Well, how do you define freedom? Well, you get to do whatever you want to. Wow, that's problematic. What if everybody did what they wanted all the time, whenever they wanted? You guys see the picture, okay? It doesn't take long to see, I'm not even sure I want to go down that road for 10 seconds. This world would be in a mess, in a hurry. And so I submitted to you last week that the definition of true freedom is when the soul of man wants to do within his being the very will of God. That's what true freedom looks like. When God changes the desires of your heart, where he makes it to where you want to do the will of God. That's what we've been singing about. I would rather have Jesus than just doing whatever I want, having whatever I want. And that is true freedom, my friends, where when God transforms your life, and that's why he can say right after that, we are beholding him. And when we behold him, we are totally transformed. There is a metamorphosis that takes place where we are no longer what we used to be. We desire something that's brand new. And so, some people like to call them born-again Christians or crazy Christians or wartime Christians. I don't know. There's all kind of words that people like to come with. It's just Christian. Okay. This is what it means to be Christian. This is the New Testament teaching. It's not Spirit-filled Christian. It's nothing special. No special name. It's very special in that you're a Christian. You've been brought from the old covenant into the new covenant. And so Paul is describing this to the Corinthians to get it in their heads. Look, you don't have to keep lusting after the things of this world. You don't have to be what you've been. Get your eyes on him and trust me, you're going to be totally transformed. And then he really puts an exclamation mark on it in verse 6 of chapter 4. He says, that light that Isaiah spoke of when he said, arise and shine upon you, the light that shined upon Christ, now Christ shines the sunrise that put to nothing the moon that you used to adore. The moon was beautiful, but it could not burn you, right? The moon was just a reflection of the real light that gave the moon light. The old covenant was just a reflection of this sunrise that's about to happen. And he who called light out of darkness, verse 6, now, because of Christ, is able to shine where? On your hearts, to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God, where? In the face of Christ Jesus. This old Eastern image of the face shining out, the face looking at you, the emperor's face or the ruler's face, when it looks on you, the favor is upon you. The ultimate favor and happiness of God is now expressed through his Son, and it's now shining on you, but not just to give a mere show in the flesh, so you outwardly look kind of happy, but it shines on your heart to where you radiate with the very life of God. It wells up inside of you. And so that's what that New Testament ministry looks like, as Paul says, now this is what we are ministers of, and not just me, but you, Corinthians, and not just Paul's day, our day, and not just me in a pulpit, but you as the people of God. This is what we are ministers of. And so to illustrate that, we have a great example of a fella in the Old Testament named Mephibosheth. So let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 19. Now, Mephibosheth lived during the days or the times of David. And many of you probably know some of his story, and we'll definitely rehearse that story for those of us that have not spent exhaustive periods of time studying the life of Mephibosheth. But I wanted to look at just 4 things that happened to him that I believe all 4 of these point to what the New Testament church looks like. I think we're given a wonderful illustration. You know, back in seminary, we were always told, don't make an illustration your sermon. And, and they're right. The text needs to be the sermon. But isn't it wonderful when the text is the illustration? So we have a perfect example of that right here in 2 Samuel chapter 19. And so let's just read the first half of verse 24, and then we'll give a little backdrop. And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. Okay, so the king is David. Saul was the king before David. Saul was the one that was chosen as the good-looking guy, the tall guy, the one that was heads and shoulders above the rest. And we know the story of Saul, most of us. He ended up becoming more presumptuous with his kingship and did not fully submit to the will of God, and the Lord took away the kingship from Saul. But during this whole transition, David had befriended Saul's son named Jonathan. And they became very, very close. David loved him greatly, and Jonathan loved David greatly. One day they're out in a field, not sure if Saul's is going to kill David. And Jonathan says, hey, look, Dad's really upset with you. We're about to have dinner, and I suppose I should go in first in case he tries to kill you. I'll at least be able to figure out, and I'll shoot some arrows out. And if I tell my servant, go fetch him, hey, just get out of here, because you're going to be in bad shape if you try to come. But before you go, before anything else happens, we need to make a covenant. And they beseech the steadfast love of the Lord. And I've mentioned to you before that in Exodus, when the Lord appears to Moses and he declares his name, remember when I spoke to you guys about that chiasm, the pinnacle of the pinnacle of the expression of God. Need to settle down up here, though. The pinnacle of his expression was that steadfast love. Do you remember that? And if you don't, that's what happened. And so God says his steadfast love is the basis of this covenant. And so they're appealing to the steadfast love of God. And they mention it a few times in this text in 1 Samuel chapter 20. You can go back and look at it later. And as they're appealing to one another, they're saying, on the steadfast love of God, let's make this covenant together. David and Jonathan is telling him, look, I believe it's yours. It's yours. God is transferring the kingdom to you. And it's a statement of faith, really, where Jonathan tells David, look, I need you to make a covenant with me that you will not destroy all of my family. Just don't do it. And so they make this covenant together, and David's like, of course. Love you, man. This is a God-given relationship we have here. And because of this steadfast love that it's interesting that God has towards us, we have that towards each other too. And it's a true picture of real love from dude to dude. I wish our modern world would understand that you can be in love with somebody of the same sex without it being sexual. Good grief. I'm so sick of this. And that's what's going on in 1 Samuel 20. And so we see this covenant that they're making towards one another. And then after that, we know some more of the story. Time passes, and the Philistines are fighting against Saul and his family, and the Philistines defeat them. And this is in chapter 4 of 2 Samuel. They have taken. We're introduced to this son of Saul by the name of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth is 5 years old at this time. And when the Philistines have killed Saul and they've killed Jonathan, where the war is happening, they're conveniently not there. Okay, not sure what's going on there. If just because it's because he's young, maybe they're back at home, who knows? But the nurse that's taking care of Mephibosheth while everybody's out fighting, grabs Mephibosheth and is running for her life. And you can imagine just the sheer terror of trying to get away from this, and drops Mephibosheth. And he's 5 and injures both of his legs to where he becomes crippled for life. And so later on in chapter 16, Mephibosheth now is older. And so a lot of stuff's happened from chapter 4 to chapter 16. Namely, David has taken over. David's the new king. He's defeated the Ammonites. He's defeated the Syrians. The dynasty of David is growing quickly, and he sins against God with Bathsheba. That whole episode takes place, and God puts him through the fiery trials of discipline. His son rebels against him. His son forms a conspiracy. His son's name is Absalom. The good-looking guy, the guy with the long hair, that this guy convinces everybody that, look, my dad's not it. Just look at what he's done, right? Pretty convincing argument. David was not the brightest star at this point morally that everybody could look up to. So Absalom has a pretty good reason to try to conspire against him. So Absalom wants the kingship. And so he gets Ahithophel, the big counselor, one of the big wigs of David, and gets him to join his side. And David, at this point, when we get to chapter 15, David is barefoot, his head is covered, and he is climbing the Mount of Olives, weeping as he goes. Sound familiar? There's someone else that took that same route 1,000 years later. And David is weeping as he goes, and he is running for his life from Absalom, his own son. Can you imagine? I can't even imagine the pain, the agony of what he's going through. And his son is coming in town, into Jerusalem, to take over as king. And David is leaving, and he gets to the Mount of Olives, and there is this servant named Ziba. Ziba comes to David as he's on his way out with 2 donkeys, and he's got a load of stuff. He's got all these summer fruits. He's got 200, a bunch of loaves of bread, 200 loaves of bread. Just all this food, which is surprisingly similar to what Abigail brought to David when David is about to take care of Naboth. You remember this? And Abigail appeases David's wrath, and and with this type of gift. And here comes Ziba with the same gift, and is approaching David, and it says here, and David says, "What is this for?" This is in chapter 16. David says, "What is this for? What are you doing here?" And Ziba says, "Well, I'm trying to help your army out. I want to help you succeed. This is for your armed men. This is, we're going to try to really help to make sure you have success as you're fleeing." Mind you, he's barefoot. He's weeping. His head is covered. He's in shame. And here comes Ziba, just looking very faithful, right? And presents to him this gift. And David's first question is, where's Mephibosheth? You're Mephibosheth's servant. I appointed you to be his servant. Now, the word servant there, remember when you're reading Hebrew, or when you're reading the Old Testament, it's written in Hebrew. And Hebrew has a bunch of words for one word. For example, the word see. You may have noticed this, especially when you're reading the King James Version. They talk about a glass of water, or just a place. Maybe there's a bowl of water, and it's called a sea. Have you noticed that? Because there's just one word for just a good bit of water, right? It's just the word for sea. So it's kind of confusing, because you're like, wow, these people were messed up. They just thought everything was an ocean. What's going on here? Well, they have a lot of under meanings for just one word. Okay, and so you have the same situation with servant. In Hebrew, it's just translated servant. What it probably means is the estate coordinator. Okay, it's the guy that's in charge of taking care of the estate of Saul. Okay, his name was Ziba, and in fact, we'll learn a little bit more about that in just a minute. But David asks, "What about Mephibosheth?" Well, the part of the story that I skipped, which is a very crucial part of the story, and it's the part of the story that you guys probably know the best. You've probably heard many sermons on Mephibosheth and how he represents the salvation and coming to the Lord. Mephibosheth was, after Saul and David had been killed, he moved away. He got far away. He lived in a Trans-Jordan town called Lodebar, and he was way over there at Gilead on the other side of Jordan. And one day, David approaches Ziba, the coordinator, the guy that was taking care of the estate of Saul, and he says, "Look, my men don't need all this land that Saul had. I want to show kindness to one of the descendants of Saul. Is there anyone still around that came from Saul?" And this is all in chapter 9, by the way, of 2 Samuel. And so this guy Ziba tells him, "Yeah, there is a guy by the name of Mephibosheth, but he's crippled in both legs." And so David said, "Well, okay, so doesn't matter. And so go get him." And so they go and bring him back to Jerusalem. And David tells him, I want all that was Saul's to be yours. I want to make you rich, basically. And this guy Ziba that took care of Saul's estate, now he's going to be your servant. He's going to be your estate coordinator, and he's going to be able to take care of any family that you have. Now, Ziba had 15 children of his own. Ziba had a pretty large family, and so, he enjoyed also being a part of this whole situation. He was Saul's servant. Now he becomes Mephibosheth's servant, being David's servant for a little while. Okay, so you're kind of following the story. And so David says, I want to show you kindness. I want to give you these things that are rightfully yours. Now, what did that have to do with him? How in the world could that have been rightfully his? See, back in that field in chapter 20 of 1 Samuel, there's only one person alive now that knew about that covenant. And it was David. Jonathan's dead. But David knew about that covenant, and David intends to keep that covenant. And so he keeps that covenant by showing this loving kindness to Mephibosheth, not mattering what he looked like, not mattering on his abilities, not mattering where he dwelt, though he was far away, not mattering what happened from the fall, right? You guys are starting to get the images of what the Christian life, we too have been brought in because of covenant. We too were injured from the fall. We too we were far away from him. We too could not have come to the king on our own power. We had to have the king extend his life to us, extend his arm to us and bring us in, right? So it's a perfect image of what what salvation looks like. And so Mephibosheth is brought into this kingdom. And he told him something very important. He said, from now on, you're going to eat at my table with me. From now on, you're going to eat with me. As did the other sons. Now, in this particular case, it was just the older sons, because we know what's going on with some of those younger guys. But he ate with the sons at the king's table. And so this is an incredible picture of mercy, of grace, but it's all embedded in covenant. And notice Mephibosheth's response, who am I that you would show me such kindness? Who am I? Why was I made to hear your voice and enter while there's room, while thousands made a wretched choice and rather starve than come? And Mephibosheth is giving that confession of what the church today confesses. We haven't deserved this. We too are a dead dog, just like Mephibosheth said. And so we are undeserving, but thank God we have been brought in to the kingdom by his grace, by his precious blood. And so now you know a little bit more of the backdrop of when Ziba comes to David now to meet him. Now you can understand a little bit more what some of his underlying motives might be. Ziba comes to David now. David is running for his life from his own son. He's barefoot, his head's covered. He's weeping as he goes. Ziba shows up with 2 donkeys full of all this supplies for care. And David says, where's Mephibosheth? See? Now you understand there's a connection here. And so in that question, he's saying, where is this guy? And Ziba now brings a slanderous report about him. See, it was Mephibosheth's idea, I think, to laden up the donkeys with all the supplies for David. Let's just show him, let's show some loving kindness to David. Let's show him we're with him. Let's get the donkeys ready. Let's get everything prepared. In fact, I'm going to ride on one of the donkeys and we're going to go over there. And Ziba takes off without Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth just yelling, just screaming there in Jerusalem, don't leave me. And he can do nothing now. His legs are useless. He has no possible way to go to the Mount of Olives. There's no way he can go down that big gully and go all the way up there to join David as he's leaving and running for his life. And he's just weeping as he's watching Ziba go off with his donkeys. And he gets there and finds David and says, oh, he stayed back at the house because he believes you're about to die. And he believes the king's about to be transferred over to him. So he gives him this false report. And so Ziba has completely betrayed his master, the covenant master. In Ziba's mind, visually, if you're watching by sight and not by faith, visually, he looks like no master. He's crippled. And the guy that made covenant with him is barefoot and he's running for his life and there's no hope for him. His fantastic looking son with the long flowing hair, the Fabio of the world, he is now taking over and he's in the throne room, taking over in Jerusalem. And Ziba, I've got a pretty good slanderous report I can bring against Mephibosheth. And if David believes this, he may just end up handing everything over to me to steward again. And that's exactly what happens. David's a broken man. And David looks at him and says, goes to figure. I mean, Ahithophel has betrayed me. I think Zadok's on my side. I got this guy Hushai. That's about it. That's pretty much all I got. And don't have anybody else really for me. So I'm not surprised that Mephibosheth would have betrayed me too. So he gives all of that to Ziba. Well, that's not the end of the story. Now we get to chapter 9. Now you can see, 19, excuse me. Now you can see why. Here is this guy that all he can do is crawl. And he is crawling. It says he went down to meet the king. When you're in Jerusalem, there's only one way you can go. It's down. And he's crawling. My gut tells me that it probably was to his injury on a few occasions, trying to get down. He sees the king coming back in. Now, David has now, from between 16 and 19, David has defeated Absalom to his chagrin. David is coming back to take over the throne. That wasn't his delight to see Saul or Absalom dead. He didn't delight in any of that. He wasn't anything like those ancient Eastern kings, those Oriental kings, that when you take over as king, you basically slay the whole house of that threat, right? In fact, that's why Mephibosheth was living in Lo-debar. He was getting as far away as possible because I don't want this guy to kill me. And so here is these threats that David is not threatened at all by. He, in fact, supports these people, only to prove that David is saying, it's not my hand, it is not my will for me to become king. I want to be a living example, or a living representation of what it looks like when God makes somebody king, that he does it, not the man, right? And so when David is coming back in town, he's taking his throne again. And once again, God has defended David, and David is on his way back, and he gets almost to Jerusalem. And here comes this guy Mephibosheth crawling to meet him. In verse 24, we see he came down to meet the king. I'm calling this Mephibosheth, number one, awaiting with allegiance the king's return. He didn't give any slanderous reports about Ziba. He's not bad-mouthing anybody. He's letting his life tell the story. I'm going to wait. And when I see that king on the horizon, I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to go out to meet him. See, to go out to meet the king in those days means that you're accepting them, right? And so to meet the king, Mephibosheth is saying, I will do all that is in my power to meet this king. Very different from the first time that he met the king. He was scared for his life. When he hears that David is beckoning him to come to Jerusalem, what is Mephibosheth thinking? He's going to cut my head off. I'm a dead man. I'm a dead dog. But instead finds mercy. Now he knows the heart of that king. And what happens? He can't wait to see him. It's an allegiance. It's a waiting with allegiance. He can't wait to see his king. I love how Paul is writing about the return of Christ. And he says, and he'll return for those that eagerly await his appearing. They're eagerly awaiting his appearing. 1 Peter 3:18 says that he, the righteous, died for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God. See, this bringing to God, this is the heart. This is what it means for the face of God to shine upon your hearts, the face of Christ shining in your hearts. This is what it looks like. You want him because he alone has shown you mercy, just like Mephibosheth. Number two. Let's read verse 24b. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes. from the day the king departed until he came back in safety. What an incredible testimony. Notice what it says, and when he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" He answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me, for your servant said to him, I will saddle a donkey for myself." This is Mephibosheth saying this. "I'm going to saddle a donkey for myself." Okay? It's confusing, the antecedents and who's saying what. So Mephibosheth is saying, "My lord, I, your servant, told, this is what I said. I'm going to saddle the donkey for myself that I may ride on it and go with the king. So my intention back in chapter 16 was to go with you." But watch. "For your servant is lame, and he," being Ziba, "has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you." And so here he is just making this appeal to him. And notice he abstains authentically. He doesn't just say that he was with the king. He lives that he was with the king. All he could do at that point, he could not run out to go flee with David. There was no other way to show his allegiance, to show that he was on David's side, except to prove to David that he did not want to become the king. How did he do that? He did not take care of his feet. He didn't wash his clothes. He didn't trim his beard. I can only imagine if someone from the Democratic Party goes and starts, claiming that they want to run for office to take over as president, what would that look like if they never washed their clothes, they never trimmed their beard, or didn't wash their feet? Do they try to win the hearts of people by looking as shabby as possible? Of course not. And that's exactly what Mephibosheth is saying here. I purposefully didn't do a thing to take care of myself, because that's all I could do to show you that I am totally in allegiance to you, to show you I am fully on your side. I'm going to let my life testify that I don't want anything but you. And so I have chosen to not do a thing to take care of myself, so the whole world, the whole city will look at me and go, "Well, there's no way that guy wants to be king." Now, as a public school teacher, I've actually smelled what that looks like or smells like, where people go months without washing their clothes. It's awful. Some of you, I suspect, have experienced the same thing. I mean, finally, you go get the counselor. Look, you've really got to talk to this kid. I mean, nobody gets within 10 feet of this guy. He doesn't realize, he thinks people hate him. Just wash your clothes, man. And that's exactly what Mephibosheth has done, but he does it wittingly. He knows he's an abomination. He knows he's a stench to everybody, but he purposefully owns the stink. Why? To show through his life, my identity is in the king. I am in union with the king. Folks, do I need to expound much on what our union with Christ looks like? Hebrews 13:10, "Let us therefore go with Christ outside the camp. Let us bear that shame. Let us bear that reproach just like Christ did. Let's identify with his sufferings. Let's own them, because folks, by our lives, people will look at us and say, wow, they don't want to be king. They want him to be king. You see, you show that not by raising your voice when you're arguing with them. You show them that by your willingness to serve. To serve first your Lord and then them. See, this is what this Christ life looks like. The earliest Christians were called Christians in Antioch as an indictment of them. You guys are little Christs running around. It was supposed to be an insult, pejorative. But they owned it. They said, yes, That's it. This is what we are. We are little Christs. We want to look like him. We want to bear his reproach. And that's why the Apostle Paul could say in Philippians, "Oh, that I might know him in the power of his resurrection," but we like to stop there. But then he says, "and in the fellowship of his suffering." John Piper tells the story of the missionary that went to Mongolia, and he goes up and climbs into the mountains, and he asks for permission to go in and preach the gospel there. And they say, "No, we don't want you in here." And they expel him and they kick him out, and he falls asleep that night under a tree. The leaders of that town go out to find him under the tree, and he's still asleep. The man's exhausted, this young man that had gone up there to preach to them the gospel. And then they look at his feet, just all cut up, blistered, totally destroyed by the walk that it took to get up to that mountain tribe. And they said amongst themselves, any person that's willing to give their feet to that kind of torture must have something worth saying. Folks, it's our lives that testify. Any person that's willing to bear that kind of reproach, to bear that kind of shame. And I'm speaking, folks, not just merely of persecution. Yes, persecutions will come. Yes, we will have troubles. But I even mean our struggles in life. Are we the types that are quick to raise our fists to God and say, "Why did you do this?" Or are we the types that say, "I will gladly bear this reproach. He's worthy of everything I have." You see? There's a huge difference when you've seen his mercy. When the face of Christ is shined upon your hearts, it totally changes the way you perceive reality. God is in control of this situation now. I don't have to be in control anymore. He loves me and he cares for me. You see? Number 3, verse 28. He says, "For all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king, but you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I then to cry to the king?" Why would I sit here and cry about somebody slandering me? I am already less than even deserving to be slandered. Do you see his premise here? I was but a dead dog. I should have been dead. Here's what's interesting, and this will really encourage you. Some of you went through great trials in your lives that shook you up and got your attention, and you came to Christ through that trial. Can anybody testify to that? Nobody. Okay. Well, it's happened to other people. Okay. If Mephibosheth was not crippled, he would have died in the war. It was his very crippledness, the very legs that were broken and unfunctioning were the very things that saved his life. Sometimes it is a great mercy of God to put us through great trials. Because were it not for the trial, we would have had the confidence to go straight into death's door. But God in his mercy gives us these trials and saves us out of them. That's why he can say, I was less than nothing. I'm undeserving. I can't complain to you. I am going to defend myself because that's not why. That's not what happened with Ziba. He totally made that up. But you're like an angel of God to me. You can, whatever you want to do, just do that. Because if anything happens to me, it is totally out of mercy. Folks, what a posture. Now, I know you guys. I know theologically you guys all agree with that. But do you really agree with that with the way you think about other people? If somebody has a real thick redneck accent, do you kind of think of them as a little bit less than you? You know? Or if somebody's not your racial prototype and you think that they're not of your stature. Or maybe somebody theologically doesn't align with you perfectly and you're just quick to look down your nose at them. See, one thing I've noticed about grace people is those are some of the most ungracious people I've ever met. Do not take the grace of God and turn it into a way for you to look down on people. The very nature of being shown grace is that you become gracious to people. Oh man, I'm so bad at that. I'm kind of waiting for the lightning to hit, okay? I do not say this as a perfect person, but folks, when he shows us mercy, wow, we should be merciful to people. When he shows us forgiveness, we should be forgiving to people, and that graciousness should just flow out of us, and that is exactly what's happening with Mephibosheth. He's gracious to Ziba. He said, whatever, just whatever you want to do, O king. My life is nothing. You couldn't preach this back in the 80s when we were going through all the therapeutic gospel stuff. You guys, some of you weren't even around then. I'm old. But thankfully we can start saying this stuff again. You're nothing. You're nothing. Without him, you're nothing. And even with him, if he decides to withhold himself, you're still nothing. And that's what his testimony is. That's what he is saying right now before the king. Whatever you want to do, just do it. Now he appeals to heirship before the king. Now, he wasn't really appealing to heirship, but we can as believers in Christ. We appeal to the heirship. He was appealing to that he was brought in. And it's one of the closest thing. Hebrews were not real big on adoption. I think you guys, if you've read the Old Testament, you've probably realized that. Okay, the word adoption doesn't show up until the New Testament. But this is a pretty good example. You know, we got Moses, we got other Ruth. You know, we got other examples or Naomi. We have other examples of these apparent adoptions. But this is a pretty good example of adoption, right? Where he takes somebody in from another household and he makes him sit at the table with him. But in the New Testament, we're told that we are heirs with Christ. And so all he could appeal to was, you're the one that invited me in, right? You're the one that started this, so do with it what you want. We, as believers in Christ, we can appeal to, we've been made sons and daughters of him. We appeal to the heirship. We sit at the table. And is it any coincidence that the communion table is where we remember his sufferings, where we remember what he's done for us? We sit at his table in the New Testament covenant as well. And then number 4 in verse 29. And the king said to him, "Why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided. You and Ziba shall divide the land." And Mephibosheth said to the king, "Oh, let him take it all, since my lord the king has come safely home." This is such a beautiful picture of what the Christian life looks like. I think Solomon learned a little bit from this, from his dad, when he had the 2 prostitutes come and say, "We both had kids last night and mine rolled over and SIDS kicked in and he died. And so I took so this lady took my son and," well, you guys know the story. And so basically one of the prostitutes tried to swap children with the other one, and that made that baby their own. And while the other mom was still sleeping, made the dead baby hers. So swapped them out. Said, "Oh, wow, oh, what a shame. What happened to your baby?" So they go see Solomon. And what does Solomon say to do? Cut it in half. Cut the baby in half. Give one half to her and the other half to her, and that way everybody can be happy. That is exactly what David is doing right here. Cut it in half. Cut the inheritance in half. It doesn't matter. Maybe not exactly, okay? But it's similar. And so what does Mephibosheth say? It's just let him have it all. What did the real mom say? Let her take the baby. See, the one that can relinquish it, is the one saying there's something more valuable than just possessing a baby. There's a life in that baby. There's something living there that my assessment of just trying to keep my baby, that's not more valuable than the baby. The life of the baby is more valuable. And this is what Mephibosheth's saying. The king is back. The king is reigning. The one who's shown me mercy gets to continue on the throne. That's enough for me. I don't care about having any land. In fact, what would that have looked like for him to have said, oh, you believe me now? All right, give me back my land now. Right? It would have been a pretty tough argument, right? Maybe Ziba was right. If you're wanting all this stuff because I'm back, maybe Ziba was right. Maybe you are interested in the stuff. But he says no. He abnegates all. That's just a fancy word for relinquishing, okay? He abnegates all for the king. Why? Because the king told him to? No. He wasn't commanded to do this at all. I mean, what in the world would have inspired him? I believe that this was completely acognitive. I don't believe anything went through his mind. I don't believe he calculated anything. I don't believe he thought about it. I just think he said, I don't care about that. I'm just glad the king's back on his throne. And he relinquishes all, not to look like a hero, not to look like somebody special. He just relinquishes it because he just wants the king. Folks, that's what it looks like for the light of the knowledge of the glory of God to shine on your hearts in the face of Christ Jesus. When he does that, in this new covenant ministry, this is what it looks like where the Spirit of the Lord is, the Spirit of Isaiah 59. And as I proposed to you last week, Spirit and light, Spirit and light. 2 Corinthians 3, Spirit and light, Spirit and light. The same Spirit, that spiritual liberty, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. This is what that liberty looks like. We have our eyes opened. The veil is taken away. We behold Him in the splendor of who He is, and it totally changes our desires, our wants, our wishes, and we become the real light of the world as we are His image, bearing His image. The Garden of Eden is happening. We are now image bearers of God in His glory, but yet so much greater, so much greater. And so that's no wonder why Luke, in Luke's gospel in chapter 9, verse 23, Jesus could say, if anyone would come after me, let him take up his cross, deny himself, and follow me. See, the thrust of that message is come after me. But if all you see is the stuff you're missing out on, you're missing the whole point. For the ones that seek to save themselves will lose it. But he that loses himself for my sake, he'll save it. Has the light shined upon your heart? Has the dawn of the new covenant shone upon you that just as He who called light out of darkness gave us just sort of a preview of what He's really going to do, has that moon disappeared in your lives? The desire to be saved by works, to fulfill the law, has the moon disappeared, and has the sun shined so brilliantly in your life that all you can say is, all I want is Christ. All I need is Christ. You can have the kingdom. You can have the inheritance of Saul. Those shackles start falling off. Leonard Ravenhill said, we sing the things of this world will grow strangely dim, but my experience has been the things of this world have grown strangely grim to the church and abroad. So we look upon Him, we behold His countenance, and those things just fall off in the light of His glorious grace. Father, I thank You for Your word. Thank You, God, that we are not called to tell people that they've got to renounce everything. We're called to tell people to look at Christ, Lord, even now, we're not called to a certain duty. We're called to a certain person. Lord, I pray that our eyes would be open to this. Give us this spiritual sight. I pray that even in our lives, that these veils will be taken away. Take the veils away so that we can see that this very God would shine upon our hearts to give the light of the glory, the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ Jesus. May we see that.